It was Halloween weekend, and it was falling on a Saturday this year. My mom always takes decorations and giving out candy very seriously. It's almost like she has to compete with the neighbors to have the most sought-after house to trick-or-treat at. We live on a corner in a regular suburban neighborhood, so when we're decorating, we also decorate the side of the house too. Since Halloween was a Saturday this year, kids started trick-or-treating earlier in the day. However, it was a cloudy, cold day, and there was a chance of rain in the forecast. My mom apparently couldn't understand that this may have been a factor as to why there weren't many trick-or-treaters out. Instead, after a few trick-or-treaters seemingly skipped our house, she assumed it was because there weren't enough decorations out to attract the trick-or-treaters. She told me to go get whatever containers were left in the attic containing decorations. I insisted this wasn't necessary, but she insisted otherwise and forced me to. So I went up to the attic, which is directly above my bedroom. The attic door is in the hallway upstairs. I pulled down the door and climbed up the ladder. We had the holiday containers sorted a specific way, so I went over to where the Halloween containers were. There were only a couple still left up there. I opened one to see what was inside and said good enough. I started dragging the container out towards the attic door, then I carefully slid the container down the ladder. As I was about to climb down out of the attic, I thought I heard something on the opposite side of the attic, like a piece of wood cracking under the weight or pressure of something. I looked over to the wall of containers in the far corner. It's an attic, though, so the sound of wood snapping or cracking really wasn't that weird. I climbed down out of the attic and brought the decorations downstairs. From there, my mom and I put out some more decorations in the front yard. It was really windy and felt like rain at any second. There really weren't many trick-or-treaters at all. My mom was disappointed because she goes all out with the candy too. She's always been one of those people. There really weren't many trick-or-treaters at all. My mom was disappointed because she goes all out with the candy too. She's always been one of those people who makes a bunch of homemade goodie bags with a bunch of different candies inside. I could see how upset she was that she wasn't going to give most of them away at this rate. The day progressed, and I was in my room playing video games on my laptop while my mom was downstairs in the living room and kitchen handing out candies to the few trick-or-treaters that would come. And then it started to rain, and that pretty much put a damper on the rest of the day, trick-or-treaters wise. I was gaming in my room when I heard a crack from above my room in the attic again. Not really abnormal, but I made a mental note that that was the second time I heard something from up there. The rest of the day was rainy, and that night it turned into a thunderstorm, perfect for Halloween night. I used to be a big gamer in my teens, and so instead of going out with friends on a Saturday night, I would often just stay in playing video games. Unfortunately, this night was no exception to that. I stayed up really late into the night past my parents. It was still raining outside. Then I heard something above me again. This time it sounded like footsteps. I was wondering if my mom was in the attic putting stuff away, but it was late at night. I sat and listened for a while. The sound stopped. I would often just stay in playing video games. Unfortunately, this night was no exception to that. I stayed up really late into the night past my parents. It was still raining outside. Then I heard something above me again. This time it sounded like footsteps. I was wondering if my mom was in the attic putting stuff away, but it was late at night. I sat and listened for a while. The sound stopped. I paused my game and went out into the hallway. After a couple of minutes, I saw the attic door was open. I now heard noises from downstairs in the kitchen. I heard the sound of things being moved around in the fridge. My heart was racing now. I tiptoed down the hall to my parents' room and quietly opened the door when I saw both my parents fast asleep in bed. I felt my stomach twist and I felt sick. I quietly closed the door and went up to my dad to shake him awake. He woke up easily, and I whispered to him, "There's someone in the house." He immediately sat up and said, "What?" I said, "There's someone in the kitchen right now in the fridge. I think they're hiding in the attic." My dad is not a large or confrontational man. He keeps a police baton under his bed in case of an emergency, but I don't think he ever thought he'd have to actually use it. My dad told me to stay quiet. He went to go look out into the hall quietly. When he came back inside, he whispered that he saw someone down the hall climbing into the attic. He shut the bedroom door, locked it, and then called 911. By now, my mom was awake too, but we all stayed as quiet as possible and didn't freak out. It was now a waiting game until the police showed up. My dad went downstairs to open the front door. The attic door was now shut. The police had to go inside, and they found some homeless-looking man hiding in the corner behind that wall of containers. The sounds I was hearing were, in fact, from a person the whole time. The man, while seeming dirty and kind of scary looking, apparently was very straightforward and honest that he simply walked in when he saw the front door was open the day before and he had no place to sleep. He brought one of our blankets up there, and there was a jar of peanut butter up there too that he was eating. The whole thing is still very disturbing, and I wonder how things would have played out if I or my father confronted the man instead of the police. My parents didn't press any charges. This happened a few years back on Halloween night. One of my friends and I had plans to go around the neighborhood and do the usual trick-or-treating kids our age would do. We were both 12 at the time, so not old enough for it to be weird to still go trick-or-treating, but old enough to be able to go without our parents. I remember being pretty excited for this reason alone. It would be the first year we would be able to go trick-or-treating with just ourselves, and this gave us the opportunity to choose our own route that hit all the good houses. The night was going like any other Halloween night. We got our bags like halfway full when it started getting late. I want to say it was around 9 p.m. by that point, around the time people started turning off their house lights to signify they would no longer be answering the door. My friend suggested we start heading back, but I was stubborn and wanted to take advantage of every last house we could. We ended up agreeing to visit one last cul-de-sac before going back home. Now, we live in a nice neighborhood, but for whatever reason, there was a huge lack of streetlights, and considering a lot of the houses now had their lights off, it was getting more and more difficult to see as we continued our walk. Seemingly out of nowhere, we both noticed the silhouette of a man walking towards us. Not like other trick-or-treaters, but rather some lone full-grown man. As we got closer, we realized he was a police officer, and as we walked past him, he introduced himself. Shortly after, he pointed to a house further down the road and explained how there was an older man living there who had been attempting to lure trick-or-treaters inside. He further explained that someone called it into the police, and that's why he was there in the first place. Throughout the short conversation, he would continually explain how his police car was just over there, like that's actually what he said, just over there, and pointed in some random direction. Even at age 12, the whole encounter felt extremely unnatural. But what the officer said next caught both of us completely off guard. He said he needed to talk to the man, but that because he was a police officer, the man wouldn't open the door for him. Though, he said if we knocked on the door, the man probably would open it, and after the man attempted to lure us inside, the officer said he would jump out of the bushes and catch the man in the act. My friend and I just looked at each other. We were both speechless. To better put this into perspective, you need to understand just how outlandish this request was. This supposed law enforcement officer was requesting two 12-year-old kids intentionally walk up to the house of a man reported to have been luring kids inside. He was essentially asking children he had just met to act as bait. Neither of us responded for a while. Eventually, the officer broke the silence with something along the lines of how we needed to do this quick. By this point, we hadn't even agreed yet. I wanted to speak up and say no, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. Just then, a large group of teenagers came around a bend in the street. They were heading in our direction. That's when the officer said he'd be right back and not to go anywhere. He went off in some random direction. As the group of teenagers passed us, one of them asked us if we knew that guy. We said we didn't and briefly explained what had just happened. Obviously concerned, the group agreed the situation was weird and offered to walk us back home. We took them up on the offer, and that was pretty much that. My friend and I wouldn't really tell anyone about our experience, but over the years, I've started to regret not making a bigger deal about it and reporting the situation to the police. We still don't know whether that was a real cop or not, but the older I get, the more I think it wasn't. And I mean, even if it was, putting two 12-year-olds in such a potentially dangerous situation is not acceptable as an officer of law enforcement or as anyone, for that matter. Police officer or not, I don't know what the guy's true motives were, and that thought still haunts me. The year I turned 13, my friend invited me and two other friends to stay at his house on Halloween night. He had a fairly large house outside of our town, and it was the perfect place to go trick-or-treating. He decided it would be cool to go out and get sweets for a movie. Fast forward, we were near the end of our trick-or-treating route, and at one house, a woman answered the door. She was tall and skinny with shoulder-length hair. Her house was disgusting. We could smell the odor of cigarettes from inside. She was quick to tell us that there were no more sweets left. However, she could try to find something for us. After a couple of minutes of waiting, she came back with an old brown paper bag with old-looking candy inside. We kindly denied the bag and told her we were getting picked up, so we better go. She grabbed one of my friends and said, "No, please," but my friend pulled away, and then she quickly shut the door. We knocked on a few more houses before hearing something going on near the parking lot of the housing complex. Someone exclaimed, "They took my child. They took her, they took her." It was her, that woman, and she was banging on my friend's parents' car. She was throwing herself at the car and hitting it with her fists. A couple of neighbors came out to the commotion. They seemed to know who she was. They apologized to us, saying it was a big misunderstanding. We quickly got into the car, and my friend's mom started driving us out. We didn't get far before the woman jumped in front of the car, claiming one of us was her child. The neighbors once again pulled her away. It was later that night, however, when things truly began. We stayed up late like any teenagers do at sleepovers, watching some scary movies. Out of nowhere, the light turned on in the hall. We could see it under the closed door of the bedroom. We assumed it was my friend's parents, about to come in and tell us to get some sleep. However, no one came in. I decided to take a peep out the door, but there was nothing at all. My friends joined me to see why the light suddenly turned on out of nowhere. My friend said, "It's her." Through a large window facing the backyard, you could see that woman standing there looking in. However, the second she saw us stare at her, she ran away. Disturbed by this, we went back inside the bedroom and locked the door. We were obviously quite shaken up by this. Who was she? What did she want? We sat around for an hour, nervous and on high alert. However, we eventually managed to fall asleep. The next morning, my friend's mom told us that the situation at the housing complex had shaken her up so much she thought she had seen that woman standing over her bed in the middle of the night. My friends and I never even told her we saw that woman at the house that night, which led us to wonder, what if, just maybe, that woman actually was inside the house that night? Last year, Halloween was on a Wednesday. Because of that, I was home alone. My dad works nights, and my mom was staying with her sister because our parents weren't getting along at the time. My sister was away at college, so it was just me left to provide for the trick-or-treaters. My dad bought a couple of bags of Kit Kats and told me he expected them empty by the end of the night. I don't know why, but my dad takes Halloween seriously. I didn't get home from classes until around 6 o'clock, so it was already dark and the kids were out in droves. The second I dropped my bag on the couch, the bell rang and that went on for some hours. I was getting homework done later on in the night when the trick-or-treaters had mostly gone home, sometime past 9 though, I remember that much, and the doorbell rang once more. It was the first time in over half an hour. I went to open the door with a near-empty bowl of Kit Kats, expecting some kids, but instead, it was just this lone guy, maybe 35 years old. He waved at me with a neutral expression on his face and didn't open the storm door. I kind of just watched him, ready to shut the door on him. He stopped waving, then reached for the handle to the storm door and pulled it open. At that moment, I slammed the door shut in his face and locked it. I texted my family group chat that some old guy just tried opening the door. My dad joked that if he does it again, go outside and teach him a lesson. I decided that was it with opening the door for the night. I went back up to my room to finish my homework. Soon, I heard yelling coming from outside. I lost my patience and eventually got up to see what was going on. I slid open my window and looked out. There was that man again down below, looking up at my window, shouting at me. He's mainly yelling that he needed help finding his son. I didn't believe him for a second. I texted my family again. My dad just said to ignore it, he will go away. I left my room and shut off the light so that he'd go away. Then I went to the basement, which had no windows. I hung out down there to do my work, and all was quiet for a while. Then flick, the power went out. My initial thought was that the man outside tinkered with the electric box outside of the house. I stayed in contact with my family the whole time. After a few minutes, I heard the floorboards creaking above my head. Someone, as if I couldn't guess who, was inside the house. My mom and dad and sister all texted me to call the cops. I stayed put in the basement. I figured it was the safest place at this point. The cops were en route, so all I had to do was wait. The basement door opened. He stepped down the stairs only halfway, though. Even without power, a little bit of light from the upstairs poured into the basement, enough for me to see his legs. He was standing on the middle step of the staircase, and I swear he just stood there for like 2 minutes. I heard him mumbling stuff. I won't even pretend I could understand any of it. After the longest, most painfully uncomfortable moment of my life, the man said into the basement, "I can see you." The whole time his legs were actually facing me. Was he actually looking at me that whole time? Still, I didn't move, nor did he. He continued to stand there until there was a bang at the front door, and he walked up the stairs, shut the door, and I heard creaking above again. I waited 20 seconds before running upstairs to the front door. By that time, it seemed the man had left my house because the cops couldn't find him even with my help. Stupidly, I left the back door unlocked, so he simply let himself in. As for the power, he messed with the electric box outside, as I predicted. I don't know if he did this on Halloween intentionally or if it was just a coincidence, but something was wrong with that man. He didn't belong out in the streets. Thanks for watching the video. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to watch the latest videos.